first hear of this exhortation, Laudate Deum, maybe as it was being released, maybe even before it was being released, because there was a bit of publicity before it was released. So I heard about this in August of this year. And when I heard about it, um, it was Pope Francis had dropped a hint that he is writing the sequel to Laudato Si. So at that stage, it was called Laudato Si 2. And I was sort of surprised and I said, wow, uh, we are still comprehending Laudato Si. I don't think we hear a lot of Laudato Si in our churches, in parishes, in sermons, etc. And now, it was 8 years, but still, and now we have the sequel coming. Now, what Laudate Deum is saying, and what Pope Francis is really saying through this sequel, is that climate cannot be overlooked. We cannot keep it at the back burner. Even though an encyclical has been written, maybe it is time to write something more on this. And he really wants to be a leader on this issue. He wants to be a leader on this issue. Little later, maybe it was around the month um, of of September, and we heard that this title of this exhortation is going to be Laudate Deum. Okay, I found that interesting because I knew it was in Latin, and I always was enchanted by Pope Francis's decision to name Laudato Si in Italian, the vernacular, the language of the people, and also he followed that. Um, Encyclicals were not written, not named, not even written in vernacular like Italian. They were always written in Latin. But Laudato Si and following that Fratelli Tutti were written in Italian. So I was enchanted by that. I really liked that. And when first I heard of this name, Laudate Deum, I said to myself, oh, why back to Latin? Why back to Latin? But then I must admit, a little later, I heard about the meaning of this. I heard about how Pope Francis explained this. Laudate Deum, it means praise be. And in his very interesting literary style that he uses in this very beautiful exhortation, it's only at the end that the title and its meaning is revealed. And what he says is, and that's when my concerns were eased. And so what he says in the last paragraph is this: praise God, that is Laudate Deum, is the title of this letter. And he elaborates, for when human beings claim to take God's place, we are not praising God, but we take God's place, that's when we become our worst own enemies. Wow, I thought that was beautiful. So, Pope Francis in Laudate Deum has a laser sharp focus on climate crisis. Now, unlike Laudato Si, it doesn't delve into many ecological topics. Laudato Si had biodiversity, it had pollution, it had water, there are social implications. Laudate Deum focuses on only one issue, a very sharp focus, and not even climate change, it calls it climate crisis. Now, this selective focus does not diminish the importance of the other issues. There are other issues like pollution and water and biodiversity extinction. It does not diminish their, uh, um, their importance, but it highlights the grave concerns that Pope Francis has on climate crisis. Now, although Laudato Si, which was written before, referred to climate change, it never referred to this issue of climate crisis, always as climate change in Laudato Si, and never used climate crisis in that encyclical. And Laudate Deum, both in its title and in its very first chapter, explicitly labels it as the climate crisis. It's not just change, it is climate crisis. The publication of Laudato Si in 2015, and there's a connection between Laudato Si and Laudate Deum. It was strategically timed at that point of time. It was to garner backing for the very almost successful and momentous Paris Climate Summit. And Cristina Figueres, who was the mastermind behind the Paris Summit, what she said and how she described Pope Francis was that he is one of the strongest leaders in the world, if not the strongest, and particularly when it comes to environmental issues. And so, Laudate Deum is targeted very, very clearly for those who are currently there at the top. It's targeted to governments, it's aimed at extractive companies, and all of us. Now, Laudate Deum has a very sharp focus on we saw climate crisis, and it's also very sharp and scientifically and statistically. Now here, Pope Francis almost very astutely goes into the nuances and the sharpness of science. And we've never seen that before in any church document. Throughout Laudate Deum, Pope Francis relies on very proper, clear, and intelligent scientific data from sources such as IPCC. And IPCC, as you can see there, the full form is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They are the group of scientists who are part of the United Nations, who are always researching and feeding us with information about the state of our common home, our planet, and also solutions. So he's quoting them all the time in Laudate Deum. Now, in Laudato Si, IPCC was not quoted. It did not have that same style of scientific sharpness that we now see in Laudate Deum. Now, as I mentioned that, we need to also, as you will be now, one hope is that you actually lead Laudate Deum. And one of the points that Pope Francis emphasizes is this figure of 1.5 degrees centigrade change of temperature caused by greenhouse gases. Now, it cannot reach to more than 2 degrees more, but we are trying for 1.5. So Laudate Deum, it emphasizes the significance of limiting global temperatures to rise more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. And now, this figure of 1.5 degrees centigrade is very crucial, is very critical, and most of the time misunderstood as a negotiable target. Should we do 1.5? Should we do 2? Should we do more than that, less than that? Now, it is not a negotiable target. It's not even a goal. What is it? Scientific consensus, and as per IPCC, it deems that if we hit 1.5 or between the range up to 2 degrees centigrade rise of temperature, that is a very high risk threshold, because it is going to bring in irreversible and horrendous changes in climate. So Pope Francis warns that 1.5 rise will result in frequent and severe heat waves. We are seeing that. And if it should rise to above 2 degrees, then the ice caps of Greenland will melt, all our cities will go, a large part of Antarctica will completely melt. And all of this is there in Laudate Deum. And this is going to lead to catastrophic consequences, including a 20-foot sea level rise, a 20-foot sea level rise. So with that, almost all the skyscrapers also in places like Mumbai, Chennai are going to be underwater. So there is going to be horrendous and irreversible climate changes if we don't restrict increase of temperatures to below 1.5 degrees centigrade. So this figure of 1.5 highlighted in Laudate Deum is a very critical and a crucial figure. Pope Francis talks about why is this cause? What is the human roots of this? Both in Laudato Si and also in Laudate Deum. And as you can see over here, the climate crisis is not exactly a matter of priority that interests the great economic powers, including India, by the way, including the US, including China, whose concern is with greatest profit possible at the minimum cost and in the shortest amount of time. Now, you may not be aware, but only just a few days, very recently at COP, India refused to sign a pledge that 108 countries, including the US, UAE, and European nations have signed, and India refused to sign that. And that was a pledge to triple our focus on renewable energy. China and India refused to sign that. And that matters. And though Narendra Modi has said that in, I think it's the year 2034, that he is going to invite the COP presidency in India, but we don't know how much is happening. Another thing that has happened at the COP is with regard to the rich countries paying the poorer countries, what is known as loss and damage fund. Now, the United Nations has said, and this is Kamala Harris has said 2 days back, she said that we are going to give you 17.5 million. That's nothing. For all the global south, the US, for the ecological sins of the past, is going to give 17.5 million. That's nothing. They're joking when they go for these summits. So the richest countries, really, the great economic superpowers, they are only concerned about profit at the minimal cost and as fast as possible. And that's one of the reasons. And something else which is coming up is this, that now they're hiding behind science and technology. And technologies like carbon capture and storage. So instead of planting trees, instead of reducing fossil fuel usage, the idea is that all the carbon dioxide, we will capture it and we will put it into the earth. Now that is not going to work. It may help to reduce the crisis, but we risk remaining trapped in the mindset of pasting and papering over cracks, while beneath the surface there is continuing deterioration to which we continue to contribute. And as Pope Francis says in Laudate Deum, we always are supposing that problems will be solved by new technical inventions, as that's not the case. That's a form of what he calls homicidal pragmatism. And one whole chapter, Pope Francis, in Laudate Deum, Pope Francis revisits the malaise of the technocratic, that's the technological, over-relying on technology, that paradigm, which he originally addressed in Laudato Si. And he calls this paradigm as treacherous because it believes that reality, goodness, and truth automatically flow from technological and economic power only. Now we know that's not the case. Now what you can see there is, there is a red color big circle. Now that red color big circle is all the carbon dioxide that will be released in the coming years by all the reserves of coal, oil, and natural gas that we know. And coal, oil, and natural gas companies, they want to make sure that all the reserves that they know of, they are going to extract, they're going to sell, and make sure that all that carbon dioxide is going to go into the atmosphere. Now, if we need to reduce the climate increase by 2 degrees centigrade, then we have to look at that blue circle. And the only amount of carbon dioxide we can release is what you can see down over there, which is about 1/5, about 1/5 of the whole big circle. That means 4/5 of all the coal, of all the oil and the natural gas, we have to keep it in the ground. We have to keep them in the ground. So there's a movement saying it, keep it in the ground. That's the movement. Keep it in the ground. We cannot extract it and we cannot run energy on it, because that is going to lead to devastation of the climate. And so there is the International Energy Agency, and they have told us this. And they have told us that there is no need, if we have to make sure that we protect the climate, there is no need for investing in new fossil fuel. And even then, Pope Francis says, oil and gas companies are producing and planning new projects with the aim of furthering and increasing production. We come to COP28, which is happening at this moment. And it is pretty clear that Pope Francis wrote Laudate Deum to influence COP28, which is happening in Dubai at this moment. Now, Pope Francis appears in Laudate Deum itself less than enthusiastic about this venue, because UAE is known to be a great exporter of fossil fuels. Not only that, it is planning to have oil and gas companies, new projects of oil and gas companies in the country. But Pope Francis says we need to hope. And what do we need to hope for? Our hope is, and we need to really pray about this and raise consciousness about this, we need to hope that the pledges and the agreements that are made for binding forms of energy transition away from fossil fuel to clean energy, and that 3 conditions are met. That they are efficient, because most of the times they're not efficient. So all the strategies and all the ideas, they're not efficient. Even sometimes the ambition target is not good enough. It's obligatory. Sometimes it's not obligatory. Somebody does it, there is no sanctions at all for any country who does not keep to their obligations. And it has to be readily monitored. So there is no monitoring system. So Pope Francis is very clear on this. It has to be efficient, it has to be obligatory, and it has to be readily monitored. Now, who you have before you here is the president of the present COP, Sultan Al Jaber. And Sultan Al Jaber, so he heads all the negotiations there at the moment. But he is also the chief and the head of ADNOC. And ADNOC is Abu Dhabi Oil Company. Now, how can you have the chief of Abu Dhabi National Oil Company as the president of a climate summit? What are we going to expect at this climate summit? And what did he say a couple of days back at the climate summit? What he said was, there is no science indicating that a phase out of fossil fuels is needed. That's what he said. Now, so there is a conflict of interest over here. How can you have somebody who is running an oil company, an oil and petroleum company, as in charge of a climate summit? Now, his comments, particularly this comments, many scientists, they said this is very concerning, this is climate denial, and is completely at odds with what the UN Secretary General just said a few days ago at the COP. And what he said was the science is clear. 1.5 degrees centigrade is not possible if we don't stop burning fossil fuels. Not reduce, let us not debate about it. Phase out. So there is a debate about two things, phase down or phase out. What he said was phase out with a clear time frame. Now, the only hope we have is that there is a lot of negativity and there are a lot of embarrassing also revelations that he used this climate summit actually to have deals that he was leaking out all the emails to the oil companies. Now, all those revelations and the negativity around him, hope that puts the pressure on him to deliver some very strong COP 28 deals. So what do we do? What do we do? The question is, what do we do? And the first thing is we can endorse and we can sign up in what is known as, and all of us, we can sign up as individuals, as institutions, and we can ask also elected officials to sign up as well on the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, the world has used treaties in the past. We have diffused especially for nuclear weapons, for landmines, even for chlorofluorocarbons, that is for ozone depletion. So we need to now focus on this treaty, which the with the European Parliament has approved of, and they have signed this. Now we need all the countries to sign on it, but we need all of you to sign on it also. What is this treaty? This treaty is a global initiative of civil society organizations, also of some national governments and local governments. It is to put pressure on international negotiations for a fast and fair phase out of fossil fuels altogether. So you can endorse as an individual. There are Nobel laureates. There are at least more than 100 Nobel laureates who have endorsed it. Scientists, academicians, youth leaders, institutions have endorsed it. Civil society organizations have endorsed it. Faith institutions have endorsed it. I think Bishop Alvin is also part of this thing. Governments can endorse this, so we can put pressure on governments to endorse this as part of advocacy. State governments also can endorse this, not only the union government, but state governments as well. And all of us who have some sort of a connection and influence over state governments, we can do that. Elected officials, even cities can endorse it. It all creates the critical mass that we need for change. Another step we need to do is disinvestment. And disinvestment is important because fossil fuel companies depend on investment and money that people give to them, that banks give to them, that insurance companies give to them. So disinvesting is important. Fossil fuel companies know about this new business model. It requires constantly more money. So if we don't give money to fossil fuel companies, they will collapse. Put the money into clean energy. So disinvestment, it means that we make sure that our finances do not fund fossil fuels around the globe. So we check with banks, we check with insurance companies regarding this. And what you can see over there is a report that was done by a Bangalore group, a Bangalore advocacy group named as Climate Risk Horizons. And what they came up with, and they named this document as Still Unprepared. And it showed that Indian banks are woefully underprepared to face risks connected with climate change. Now, this is something that happened at a cricket match between India and Australia in Sydney. And an Australian came on the pitch, and you can see what's there in his hand. No 1 billion loan for Adani by the State Bank of India. That's an Australian holding it, because Adani is trying to extract coal from the Great Barrier Reef just off Australia. So our banks are putting money into dirty companies that are only helping to damage our climate. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to remove money from banks who don't have good ethical policies and put money into banks and into companies which have greener policies. Pope Francis says that the international community may be doing very little, and the shortcomings of all of that has to be compensated by civil society organizations. So we need to network together. We need to join up together, find out events that are happening, associations, organizations that are actually standing for this. We're not to compete with them to who's doing the most, but we connect with each other, network with each other. And that's what Pope Francis is saying. Pope Francis believes that grassroots movements are much, much better, although he wants multilateralism at the level of the international communities, but he says civil society organizations are doing much, much more. So that's number 3. What can we do? And finally, the power of small actions. Every little bit helps. That's what Laudate Deum says. And we can see there the story of the starfish. Laudate Deum tells us we need to realize there are no lasting changes without cultural changes. We have to change the way we do things, our culture, our lifestyle. And no cultural changes happen without personal changes. So it starts with me. Starts with me. So we look globally, but we act locally. And locally is where I am. And so finally, it's a spiritual document. There's no dualism about it. It is not that this is disconnected from spirituality. It is secular, and there is no disconnection now. What Pope Francis is saying in Laudate Deum, there is no disconnection between the secular and the sacred. They are one and the same. It started with Laudato Si, actually, because Laudato Si was the first to introduce spirituality into the ecological domain. So much so that now at this COP, there is also a faith pavilion. And unfortunately, Pope Francis could not be there. Otherwise, Pope Francis was supposed to inaugurate the faith pavilion. So Pope Francis has really brought faith and spirituality into the ecological dialogue. And Laudate Deum carries on from where Laudato Si left. And what does Pope Francis stress? And this is a very beautiful line about the non-dual spirituality that Pope Francis believes in. He says this: this allows me to reiterate 2 convictions that I repeat over and over again, Wow. So what are these 2 convictions that he repeats over and over again? Number 1, everything is connected. There's nothing that is not connected. Science is connected with spirituality. The sacred is connected with the secular. The cry of the poor and the cry of the earth, it's all connected. And this sort of a very radical line that he puts into Laudate Deum. You are not going to be saved alone. We sometimes have this idea of personal salvation. I'm going to go alone to heaven. And no, we're all connected. There is nothing in a way called personal salvation. We have to be saved together. And that's what this project is about. That's what the Christ project is about.